am so thrilled to have with us the incomparable, the nonpareil Josh Fox. Now, you may know Josh Fox as the guy who did the film Gasland, and several other extraordinary films, including Gasland 2, 3, 11, 12, etc. Now, I want to tell you,
it feels like that.
Josh Fox is literally, I mean, you think Superman's cool. All he could do is leap a tall building in a single bound, which is nothing, because you, Josh, started the entire anti-fracking movement with your film and your work. And are you proud of yourself?
I'm very proud of the movement that I'm a part of, and that
that's like Martin Luther King saying he's proud of being part of a movement, the civil rights movement. No,
I was very lucky to be able to document people who were fighting against the oil industry.
Yes,
who were incredibly powerful, strong, iconic, emblematic, amazing individuals, and bring them all together into a series of films. And also very happy to be able to represent that movement as much as I could. And thank you so much for that. And look, I mean, I do believe that with the right organizing, we can do anything. And there's an ecosystem that involves journalists and filmmakers and political leaders and mom and pop tiny little nonprofit organizations that are fighting against the oil industry all over the world and all over the country. And that vast ecosystem of people, which is, I think, in the tens of millions for sure, if not the hundreds of millions, are capable of defeating the most powerful interests on the planet. And I do think that with this new film, what I'm hoping to do is help organize that amazing power, or at least make another contribution to that global movement, and in this case against Donald Trump and fascism and xenophobia and the wall and all the ways in which climate.
So what are you then going to have left over to do on Thursday? Let's start. Wait, I want to stop you here a second, because you just dropped something out really important. Your brand new film, and I got to tell you, I've seen it twice. It's insane, amazing, and the big thing, it's really a big step up with you artistically, as a filmmaker, and as a can I use the term public intellectual? You got the beard.
Sure.
You have to get rid of the baseball cap, but the beard. As a public intellectual, has really put together two of the giant issues of our time: mass immigration and the climate crisis, and how one is generating the other. But this is not your dad's PBSE BSE. This is, well, frankly, it's entertaining. It's wildly entertaining. What I want you to think of, and then I'm going to talk to you about it, but I have to say a few things after seeing it. I realized, what is this guy doing? This film is shot on 5 continents. Josh, you went to 5 continents. I can only name 4. But so I don't know what the other one is. But of the 5, in those 5 continents, you're running around. This took years to film. I mean, you're in the jungle. You're everywhere. I don't want to give it all away. But think of this film. When I was looking at it, I was thinking, you're like Anthony Bourdain in reverse. He went to all these places, remote places, to find really exotic food. And then he'd get the kind of sideways, you get the whole political situation. Oh, wait, there was a massacre of 1,100 people in the next village. So you're kind of the Bourdain in reverse, because you go to all these interesting places and you're finding out the story of climate refugees, and you get to eat some really interesting stuff. So tell us a little bit, what is the important thing about this film, which, it's called The Welcome Table.
Thank you so much for that. And I am I guess what did you say, a public intellectual? That's a nice thing. I think of myself as an artist and also as an activist. You might notice,
in other words,
my fingernails painted orange because it is, in fact, before the 23rd when we're taping this, and the Knicks are playing tonight. That's a whole nother struggle. But what I want to say about the film is that about 10 years ago, I came out with a film called How to Let Go of the World and Love All the Things Climate Can't Change, which was a movie about climate despair, about climate, about the incredible emotional toll that knowing what's actually going to happen with the climate will take on you. And how do we get through that? Because at that time, 10 years ago, we were already in a very bad situation where 2 degrees of warming, which has been defined as sort of an absolute limit among scientists at the Paris Accords and in so many other ways, 2 degrees warming brings about a hellish landscape. And 10 years ago, we were locked in on that. And in the 10 years since then, we've done actually even worse. All the things that are creating more and more fossil fuels emissions, the global economy, of course, being dependent on fossil fuels, but also the introduction of AI and data centers, which are going to be like fracking on steroids, we're moving in the wrong direction. So 10 years later, this film gives an assessment of what's going on with the climate, and it is not a pretty picture. And this is the first movie, I believe, or one of the first movies that actually looks at climate change as it's happening right now. Because it's not some faraway future, prediction. This is happening now. We're having fires now. We're having floods now. We're having famine now. We're having, incredibly difficult conditions for people that are dangerous, and that is resulting in the beginning of what is going to be the largest mass migration in human history. It is forecast that about a third of all of humanity will lose their homes, and that is not in a short period of time. The IPCC, the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is made up of thousands of scientists worldwide, they can see the future. And that future is a nightmare. And what they have predicted is that about a third of the habitable land that we have now is going away. So a third less land and places for people to live. And where are we all going to go? We are either going to be in the position of having to move ourselves or getting very, very good at welcoming people who have been in harm's way, who have lost everything. And so the welcome table is about this idea that we can have a future of walls and racism and xenophobia and incarceration. The vision of the future that Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and people like that are pushing forward, which is a global fascist movement that hates immigrants, that is racist, or a wall on its side can be a table. So the idea that a table is the symbol of generosity, of togetherness, of solidarity, of working together, and of a future which binds people together where we can sit and discuss and talk to each other. Because really, the wall is a metaphor. It doesn't really work. You just need a ladder. But the wall is basically a metaphor that just says, go away, we don't want you here. And I was thinking, what is the opposite of a wall? And the idea of the table came about. I don't exactly remember why, but in 2019, when Trump first started separating families, basically kidnapping children, I was so upset. And my father was actually a displaced person. He was a Holocaust survivor. And as a child, he was separated from his family quite a lot. He was an infant survivor. And so he got incredibly upset about this, orphaning all these children and ripping them apart from their families, which is child abuse, which is human rights abuse. And many of those children have not yet been found. So I went to El Paso with the idea that I was going to do some kind of investigation of what was happening down there, and came up with this idea of the border table, that we were going to put a table on the border and invite people from both sides to sit and talk. But I realized that this was much broader than just the border in Mexico and the United States. And weirdly enough, I was, not weirdly enough, but perfect timing, Bernie Sanders was starting his 2020 presidential campaign. And I was invited to go to Columbia, South Carolina with Bernie and Dr. Cornel West and Nina Turner, amazing, wonderful people who are my heroes, and talk about water, because Bernie was focusing on water in that one place where it was very polluted. And I got there at 10 o'clock at night, and Cornel West flew in, and he got in at like 10 o'clock at night, and there was nothing open in Columbia, South Carolina, nowhere to eat, and we were starving. And so we ended up at the McDonald's drive-thru, and I was in the back seat of a rental car with Heather Goutney and Dr. Cornel West, and he says, "What are you working on?" to me, and I said, "Well, I'm working on this film called The Border Table." And he goes, "Oh, Border Table, Border Table. James Baldwin's last book was called The Welcome Table. But nobody's read it. It was never finished." And so we talked about this, and I thought, Welcome Table. What could be a better title, a better metaphor And then I was in New Orleans, and I was at a jazz club with the greatest jazz singer in all of New Orleans, John Boutte. And John Boutte gave this incredible concert, and I talked to him afterwards. He knew my work, and he signed his CD to me, and on that CD was a song called "The Welcome Table." And I thought, this is too perfect. So I hatched a plan for John to sing to a long empty table on the very same levee that burst to swamp New Orleans during Katrina. And he sings that song, and it's, I want to sit at the welcome table, I want to see that beautiful city, I want to sing and never get tired. And it's this vision of heaven, it's this vision of the future. And I thought, there's no better way to think about this, and a wall on its side could be a table. We have to focus on welcoming people who are in harm's way, not incarcerating them, not throwing them in jail, not kidnapping their children, not abusing them, not destroying the human rights of these people. And so that was the genesis of the film. And then I went all over the world and met people who were displaced by climate change. First in the United States. First in places like Paradise, California, where fires were ravaging, and Hurricane Ida and Hurricane Maria and Irma in the Virgin Islands. And then further afield to places like Turkana in northern Kenya, where there's an incredible drought and famine, and people have been migrating to the shores of Calabria, which is part of my heritage. My mother was Calabrian, Italian, and boats arriving from Africa daily with
I wanted to ask you about
migrants.
that.
And then all over the world to find those stories and then bring everybody back to that table to meet each other and become what I knew would be an instant community of generosity and hope and love. And then we built the table 1,000 feet long and invited the whole city of New Orleans. And I won't spoil the film, but it's a pretty remarkable journey, and it took a very long time to make. And I'm so stunned that it's coming out on HBO, because right now there's so little like this that's coming out on major streaming platforms, or major platforms at all.
Well, a little bit of a spoiler alert, which, don't worry, we'll only play it for my paying subscribers. You have all these. It's 1,000 seats on this table on a levee in New Orleans, and the image is extraordinary, especially the drone shots. You have 1,000 people at this table, but they're not served any food or water. Now, why was that? What's the meaning of that?
Well, it was not about food and water. Also, it was hard.
Oh, come on. It was an HBO budget thing. They told you, give them Diet Coke and a ticket home.
You'd be surprised how much, in a position, a filmmaker like myself has a very unique relationship with HBO, where they're giving me a license to the film, and that's the budget, and I have to go out and raise probably twice as much. But, the table itself, and no disrespect to HBO. I love HBO. This is my fifth project with them, fourth movie.
I love them too, because they put out your amazing movies.
Yeah, thank God for them. And it's a terrific partnership, but it is a partnership where we often dream up things that are above and beyond what the original budget was. But anyway, the idea is that it's a metaphor, and it's a place where we get to gather and be together. And the great New Orleans tradition of second line, which is to march through the streets with waving handkerchiefs and singing and celebrating, and there's a band. And so the idea was really about singing.
Yes.
And I knew kind of how it was going to look, 1,000 people at this very long table, but I didn't know what it was going to sound like. And the sound of 1,000 people singing that song, after at the very beginning of the film there's only one person singing it, is life-changing for me. The defiance and the celebration simultaneously. The celebration of migrants, the celebration of people who have to travel. Look, everybody wants to travel, but nobody wants to permanently leave their home. Not under duress, not because they've lost everything. If you have to abandon your home, you are in a very vulnerable situation, and you need to be taken care of. And this is a country of immigrants. This is a culture of immigrants. It makes no sense that we treat immigrants with racism and hostility, because they've built this entire country and this culture that we live in. I am the son of immigrants, as well as most everybody from America is from somewhere else, unless you're Native American. And, even the Native Americans came here from somewhere else at some point in time. So we're always migrating. The question is, in a planet that's fundamentally changed, where is home? And how do we create home? How do we create home and safety? Where are our hearts going to live? And I think that what we find in the Welcome Table is when those people from 6 continents get together and meet each other, that is our new home. Each other the way that we can take care of each other, the way we can respond, as Rebecca Solnit writes in her book, A Paradise Built in Hell, we can respond with our best selves and create a new world based on generosity and sharing rather than on greed and racism and xenophobia and militarization.
Okay, again, we're speaking with Josh Fox, the director, producer, writer, singer, banjo man, and of the wonderful film The Welcome Table. It's extraordinary, and I hope you'll catch it on HBO. And it meant a lot to me, and and I want to ask you because Josh takes us to 5 continents, and you meet some of the most extraordinary, engaging, interesting people. You just love them, and you say, yeah, I'd like to have that person over my house. Well, welcome them over, set the table. It's brilliant. I want to ask you particularly, though, because you go to Africa, you go to South America, you're in the Amazon, you're all over some dangerous places. And when I say dangerous, I don't mean from the people, I mean from the mosquitoes and all the crap that happens when you're in the middle of nowhere. But I think the most moving of all the scenes was when you went into deepest, darkest Calabria, Italy. So could you tell us a bit about the importance of that and what happened there that you were filming? I just want you to tell the story.
Well, my grandparents, my grandmother was born in Calabria, and most of the people you might meet in New York or who have immigrated to other countries are from the south of Italy because it was the poorest part of Italy, and our chief export at the time was our people because there was no work for anybody. I wanted to go there because it was also the place which was actively keeping migrants from Africa. If you want to get to Europe from Africa, you potentially would go to Libya, survive the Sahara Desert, survive, as one of our subjects, Chris Obehi, Libyan prison, and then get on a tiny inflatable raft and set out towards the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean, where you will trying to reach a place called Lampedusa, which is a tiny little island, which is an Italian island, but it's close to Libya. He was rescued by a ship, and a lot of the people who are migrating are rescued, but it's estimated that something like 30,000 people have drowned in the Mediterranean trying to reach Europe from Africa, and that Europe is using the Mediterranean like a wall. And like the wall, it's not working. It's not working as a deterrent. It's not working in terms of stopping people from coming. Its only function is to make life much more fatal for migrants. And the Italian government has been giving warships to Libya and calling it the Libyan Coast Guard. And the Libyan Coast Guard has been seen actually shooting at these rafts full of migrants or trying to capsize them and drown everyone on board. And we have footage of this in the film. And it's
pretty grim. It's really...
Whoa! And Chris Obehi survived, youngest person we interview, he's I think 24, 25. He survived the trip, made it to Italy, and then became a famous musician because he's an incredible singer-songwriter. And this incredible singer-songwriter is shaking up these sleepy towns like Palermo and other places in the south of Italy. And, I went back to the same street where my grandparents left and found that those Italian towns, like so much of America, were empty. These Italian towns didn't have enough children, because Italians are not having children at the same rate, that they couldn't keep their schools open. And there's a mayor in Calabria in a place called Riace, Mimo Lucano, who said, these people are not a threat. These people are a resource. And they were about to shut the schools down in Riace because there weren't enough children. So he said, no, migrants are welcome. And he created what's called the International Global Village. And he began an economy based on these migrants where they had jobs, they had houses. And Riace came back to life. It became an international model of welcoming, and he was called by Forbes one of the greatest leaders in the world. So what does the Italian government do to reward this man's genius and accomplishments of rejuvenating his town in southern Italy, in Calabria? They prosecuted him for for crimes, something like illegal use of resources or something trumped up. And when we met him, he was facing
that's a very marked pun. Go right
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, facing something like that, and I don't have the exact on my brain, but he was facing charges that he had basically given help to migrants, who then rejuvenated his town's economy. And he was facing 14 years in prison when we met him. At 65 years of age, 14 years in prison is the rest of your life for a lot of people. And so I'm not going to tell you what happened to Mimo, but Mimo was a very, very brave person, and we go to Riace and we meet migrants there who are absolutely incredible people. A woman named Delphine and her son Prince from Cote d'Ivoire speak perfect Italian, and have a lot to contribute to the world. And our world is changing, you know. And this is not to minimize the idea of how difficult it is to do international collaboration, or whatever approach you're going to have to this. But because welcoming is very hard to do. You have to meet from 2 different cultures or 5 different cultures at the same time and figure out what words mean and figure out what culture means. And certainly there are societies that didn't spend the last 100 years fighting for gay rights and fighting for women's rights and fighting for anti-racism like we have here in the United States. But at the same time, there is this cultural matrix which we absolutely need to explore. And what's so ironic about this is that these places in Italy are empty. You see empty buildings, dilapidated buildings, places that they're, say, for rent everywhere, because there's nobody there. All of the people, like my ancestors, came to America or went somewhere else, right? So they're protecting this empty ivory tower, when we could be doing the things that bring about the great cultural matrix that we live in. Can you imagine New York City without pizza? Well, there was a time when New York City was very, very hostile to Italian migrants. We found cartoons portraying the wall. We saw Italians being portrayed in New York magazines with exaggerated mustaches, knives in their teeth, hats that said anarchy, socialism, the slums of Europe are coming, and in exactly the same way that Donald Trump portrays Mexicans and other Latinos and people from all over the world, Italians were being portrayed as that. And now, you can't think of New York without pizza. Well, what is that food of the future that is coming from the migrants that we should be welcoming here to the United States to make our lives richer and better? It makes no sense. And, it brings to mind their vision of a very, very dystopian future with mass incarceration and surveillance, because the wall is not just down there. The wall is everywhere. The wall, ICE is everywhere. We are seeing a Gestapo invade this United States on behalf of white supremacists, and it is extremely scary, and it has to be opposed. We have to fight back in the major media, we have to fight back in the streets, and that's what this film is trying to say.
Well, I think it gives you a reason to fight, and it gives you a sense of whom we are welcoming. And now you do have, and by the way, when you talk about Calabria, you were there on your family street, and we see this amazing picture. It's gorgeous, by the way. But it looks like ruins because people have left. And yeah. Did you ask anyone? Do you see any irony about the fact that you're emptied out in this town because everyone was welcomed in America, kinda, and they were allowed in, and at the same time, so you lost these people to America because it was somewhat welcoming, and now you're blocking other people from simply filling those empty spaces. Did anyone see the irony?
Of course, and the people see the irony. It's never the people on the ground. It's always the propaganda that's coming from the extreme right wing. And the extreme right wing, like in America, has taken over Italy at this moment, right? But I had the kind of reverse White Lotus experience when I went to Calabria, because I went to the town where I was from, and my mother remembered it's Loriana di Borello. She said it was because she always remembered it because she thought it was Loriana di Bordello. So I go to Loriana di Borello, and I find my cousin's house, and they immediately welcomed me in. We had the same great-grandfather. Well, their great-grandfather was the brother of my great-grandfather. And immediately we were a family. And it was a remarkable thing for a kid from New York who has none of those relatives in the United States, or very few. And on my father's side, the Jewish side, Holocaust wiped out 300 of our family members. So to find a huge family in Italy all of a sudden and be welcomed was a remarkable thing. And they knew very well what I was doing. And in fact, they helped translate for the film. So the idea that, look, what goes around comes around. At one point, our group of people are the hated migrants, and another time, it's the government saying on behalf of us, like Americans, oh, we should, but that's not who we are as people. And I think that's true everywhere. Welcoming is a virtue. You know what I mean? Everyone has a welcome mat. Everyone has a table. Pretty much everyone. And so for me, that's the symbol of climate change. That's the symbol of migration crisis, right? It's not this far away, oh, is it going to rain? Is it going to be a tornado? Is it going to be a fire? When you think about climate change, I would like you to think about a table. I would like you to think about a welcome mat. I would like you to think about this idea, which is really an indigenous virtue of welcoming, right? The guest friendship that comes from the ancient Greeks. But the idea that our society, which is so individualistic and so capitalistic and so transactional, has lost touch with the idea of welcoming. To me, I just wanted to kind of come in and say, look, what about welcoming? What about that? That's a virtue, right? You're a virtuous person, or do you think of yourself as an ethically good person? Well, let's think about welcoming, because so many people for so long have been unwelcome. And as my ancestors were unwelcome in New York, and it's not to say that the Italians coming to New York were exactly model citizens. There were things like the mafia. There was a lot of violence, a lot of drugs, a lot of racism coming to New York from Italians when they got here. Thankfully, not as much anymore, right? But it's not as if we can point to this wonderful country of Italy and say all of these terrific citizens who came to New York were not problematic. In fact, we were deeply problematic. But at the same time, we can't look at other people from Africa, from Latin America, and say, oh, they're criminals, without also going, look, every group of people has good and bad. Every group of people has virtuous citizens and non-virtuous citizens. But the point is that we increase who we are when we focus on the good, when we focus on the welcoming, when we focus on the pizza, and think about how terrific our culture can be when it's starting to absorb so many different people. That is the ideal of the world. And as a world traveler for years and years and years and years, it's so obvious to me that all of our cultures have very unique, different strengths and very unique, different problems. And it is only by meeting each other that we find the solution to those problems, and that we can celebrate our uniqueness and share. And that is what I've spent the last 30 years doing, both in the theater and in film. And in this movie, I think it really comes through.
I want to ask you about a couple of these episodes. You went
Sure.
into Brazil and met an extraordinary group of people.
I went down to Brazil to work with a firefighter named Leo Fara, who is an internationally famous first responder. He wrote a great book. He's got a Netflix series coming out about him. He's like a real hero. And I went down there because there are these horrific landslides that are happening throughout the world, but especially in Brazil and in other places in South America and Latin America and Central America. And so we went to see a town which is like a beach town called San Sebastian. And if you could picture sort of like the Hamptons and the south side of Chicago in the same place, right? So you have down at the beach the very, very rich people's houses, and up on the hill the poorer favelas, where people are living, in much, much worse conditions with a lot of people in one place, in one house. And the landslide, it rained, it put in, I think it dropped a year's worth of rain in 6 hours. And when that happens, it completely erodes all the land underneath these houses and underneath these trees, and the land slides. And when the land slides, it'll bury an entire neighborhood. It'll bury an entire house. And, hundreds of people have lost their lives with this torrent of thousands and thousands of tons, millions of tons of mud coming at them. And so we were going to a place which had been devastated. And the landslides are very strange because they'll rip out one block and the next block is totally fine. So you'll be on 86th Street and 87th Street is gone. And everybody on 87th Street died, and on 86th Street you're fine. You know what I mean? But the question is, when's the next one coming for the next street over, and is it safe to live there? And the poorer favelas are the more unsafe areas. They're up on the side of the mountain. They're much more prone to these landslides and to their houses falling down. And also, The rich people down at the bottom got it pretty bad too. There were places that were completely decimated by the landslides, and so it was a portrait of inequality, seeing how the rich could actually do a lot of charity work, but they were going to be okay. Whereas one of the subjects of our film just lost everything. Their entire house. They got right out of the house right before their house tumbled down the hill and into the ravine, and with their child and their wife, and we were doing a little bit of like reconnaissance to look at some of this damage, and this family walked right by me, and what looked like two people and a child, and they said, if you're doing filming of the landslides, you should come up to the top of the hill. There's a better view from up there. So we went up there, and it was a welcome, and immediately they started telling us their story, introduced themselves as Jessica. And Jessica had a child and a girlfriend or a wife, and was living now in the next house with her brother and 12 different people all in one cramped place. No electricity, no stove, no gas, no nothing, and was cooking with like basically firewood in the back. And we immediately connected those people, or my translator did, Karina Lepenta, with the local NGO that just so happened was being run by a very, very wealthy woman, and her second in command was a gay man who had lost his house. And so it started to become about the hardship of LGBTQ and LGBTQ people, specifically trans people, in Brazil, because there's a lot of bigotry and a lot of bias. Both Jessica and Gabriel had been forced to live on the streets in Sao Paulo and reinvented themselves in this other place called San Sebastian. And then we were told by Leo that we had gone up into this favela and we could have been killed because we had cameras. The gangs who run the cartels who run that neighborhood could have thought we were the police. And he screamed at us. He said, "You can't get back into that neighborhood without the local council person. I know her. Her name is Paulette." And I thought, oh, city council person, middle-aged politician, local politician. I've met a lot of these people.
She was amazing, by the way.
This is a
character that everyone has to,
Yeah.
watch the film for this lady. This whole crew, just the Brazilian story alone.
I show up in Paulette as this extraordinarily beautiful trans woman, and is the local celebrity. And all of a sudden now we have the Queer Mutual Aid task force on hand. And that section, I think, is one of the first movies to look at LGBTQ issues and climate, because climate change is going to worsen all of our current indices of bias and bigotry, and also all the hardships of life, right? So the IPCC shows that we have 127 different impacts from climate change, and that's everything from flood, fire, famine, the things that we think about, extreme weather, to war, to gender-based violence, to urban violence, as people are displaced from their rural situations and forced into cities where they're being preyed upon by gangs, and there's another story like that in the film. But this film examines the specific hardships of the LGBTQ community and the trans community specific, because the place where aid is given out is often the church. And Jessica, who when they meet Paulette, immediately says, "Oh, actually, my name is Jeff. I'm a trans man." And because of that moment between Paulette, the trans woman, and the person who introduced themselves as Jessica to us, Jessica becomes Jeff. And all of a sudden you have this instant community that is helping each other with resources, because the church Jessica, at the time Jessica, but Jeffine says, "I'm not going to a church which has been biased against me my entire life. I would rather be here alone and figure it out than go to those churches." So looking specifically at the hardships of the LGBTQ community with respect to climate change, and this is one of the first movies that does that. I haven't seen a movie that does that. And the people, and people are extraordinary. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that is an extraordinary part of the film, and that's really one of your gifts here. You're a great poet too. I mean, because you make these connections like climate change, gender bias, obviously anti-immigration fears and craziness, and it's very well put together without it being preachy, and you don't feel like you're in front of a whiteboard with a guy with a marker pen. Instead, you got a guy with a microphone who's just taking you to really interesting places. I mean, it's a hell of a travel log in a way, and it ends up back with ourselves. By the way, musically, this film is quite original and astonishing, including, I mean, you do have great, I think, a cellist or I think it's a cellist who was playing after the Calabrian
Yeah.
piece. It was just tremendous. And then the use of opera when you're in Italy, fantastic. But you also bring in, like you say, your musicians from New Orleans and everywhere else. Could you give us a sense? Because it's just quite amazing the use of music in this film.
Thank you.
So you can turn off the film and just keep the sound up. It'll be great.
Yeah, well, The Welcome Table is a song, so it's a movie about a song, right?
Yeah,
But
okay.
the
Duh,
but
I should have figured that out.
it's
Okay,
New Orleans, which is our greatest cultural city in the United States,
indeed.
which is the birthplace of jazz and of rock and roll and of Tennessee Williams and of the Congo Square Preservation Society and enormous and Creole cuisine. That is a place that is so rooted in music and place and sound and tradition and one of the most incredible places on earth, and is probably the most endangered city due to climate change in the world, or at least in the United States.
Certainly.
And so the film, after I go all over the world, we invited all of the main subjects of the movie to that table on the levee. About 20 of them were able to get there with visas and so forth, and that is the sort of spine of the movie. We go through the table as we go around the world, and we see these people come together and make the conscious choice to become a community, to become friends and to become family, great love comes out, and we're talking about people from Kenya and from Australia and from Nigeria and from Calabria and from all across the globe. I mean, from California, and what I thought was, these people are going to come here. We're going to film on the levee for 5 days, which we did. They need to be welcomed. So I called all my favorite musicians in New Orleans, and I was very blessed with some of the great, legendary musicians of New Orleans coming to sing songs of welcoming to the table. And we recorded those, and those songs are kind of the chapter headings in all the films. So you have John Boutte singing the Welcome Table, and also I do No Surprises by Radiohead with him. He does Someday We'll All Be Free at the end of the film, intercut with We Shall Overcome. We have an amazing band that I love called Handmade Moments, singing one of their songs, and just and we didn't get the rights to all the music that we actually had in the movie, so I'll probably be putting some of that on my Substack as bonus features. But incredible musicians, and music, is one of the things that carries you through. There's something about music, especially New Orleans music, which is both a celebration and is an acknowledgement of the really painful things in life, and the difficult things in life, and enduring that from the inside out, and using that to create something beautiful. We don't have to fall into a Mad Max world of horror and misery. We can create things that are beautiful out of this crisis. We just have to choose that. And so making that choice is so evident in that culture of New Orleans, because it's such a place of hardship, and it comes through the film and the music. And there was an unbelievable outpouring of support on behalf of New Orleanians who come to the table at the end of the film, and also the artistic community there, which I'm so blessed to know and to be able to work with. And John Boutte, who is this amazing singer, if you know him, he wrote the Treme.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you'll get this
He wrote the
opens and
Treme
you'll
theme
love
song.
this.
He wrote the Treme theme song, if you watch the Treme program on HBO. He co-narrates the film with me. And we also have the subjects of the film co-narrating the film as well. So you get this ensemble narration with all these different accents and colors and tones throughout the whole film, which is also an innovation of this movie.
Well, one thing that also grabbed me, speaking of New Orleans, you go to Australia, and I'm watching the scenes in Australia. You got a lot of frequent flyer miles on this thing. Australia.
I have a lot of miles.
So
luckily,
we go to Australia, and you hear the story about basically how speculators and others use climate disasters as a means of instant gentrification and purging of the minorities. And I was immediately thinking of, because I did a film for the program Democracy Now! Called All Washed Away, And I said, that's New Orleans, where basically they changed uh, Louisiana from Democrat to Republican by washing away the wrong colored citizens of New Orleans in the flood. And I once said, in fact, unfortunately Amy Goodman had cut it out when I said Dick Cheney is the only man I know who prefers a hurricane to a blowjob. But then you do take it right back to New Orleans, which I should mention you live there part of the time, so that's part of your heart,
Yeah.
and as it is mine. And it's quite extraordinary that basically for some climate disaster is a profit center, and you bring that out without being preachy
Right.
or
It's called,
dull
it's called climate gentrification. It's the final stage of climate displacement. In New Orleans, when the levees broke and swamped so many places, a lot of people were displaced. New Orleans is still not a Katrina level population, and a lot of people were told that they could not go back to their own neighborhoods, even though they weren't necessarily flooded.
Oh yeah,
because there was corruption, and people wanted to take those very valuable houses. And the Treme, where John Boutte comes from, and we do tour the Treme a little bit with John, was one of those places that was a black neighborhood with an incredible culture, and musicians were everywhere, including John. And now is a lot of Airbnbs. And we intercut that with a sequence in Byron Bay, Australia, where something similar happened. Floods, fires came, and the victims of those fires and floods were moved off to these pod villages, which are very bizarre places. They're like it's like the surface of the moon. It's like these pods that look sort of like trailers. It's like pod living for a pod future. And the Aboriginal village, Cabbage Tree Island, was forced off their original place into these pods and told by the government that they couldn't go back. That's climate dispossession, and that's very, very valuable land that no doubt developers want to come in and
well, that's what happened in New Orleans.
Tourism and whatever. And this is exactly what happens. So when I remember during Hurricane Sandy here, there were groups that were extremely adamant to keep developers out of places like the Rockaways and Breezy Point and other places that were destroyed by Hurricane Sandy. But this is a big, big worry, and the final stage of climate displacement, climate refugeedom, is to take people's land that wasn't necessarily destroyed, just because it is a political and an economic opportunity in the madness of that moment of the storm or whatever has come. Right.
Well, I got to tell you,
see in Boulder, Colorado, where we cover the fires, it's not in the film, but rent tripled in Boulder. So if you were living in an $800 room in a house, it was now a $2,400 room, right? And they're selling off burned up plots, which, by the way, nobody should buy because they're toxic as hell. And now there's a housing crisis, and the capitalist machine comes in and displaces people and jacks up the rent so that only the fabulously wealthy can have those desirable areas. And we're entering that era. And in the film, we call it climate apartheid. We call it, because it's not just in these little places, this is a global phenomenon, right?
Yeah, well, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that in New Orleans when, after Katrina, one of the only places which was not flooded were the gorgeous Lafitte homes, and all those people were thrown out so that they could sell those townhouses, which were public housing. They could sell off those townhouses, and the people were not allowed to return, and they were shoved to a place called Renaissance Village, 100 miles away, and it looked just like those pods they were putting people in Australia. So I think we should just call these, climate refugee pods, because clearly they're using the same cookie cutter for basically refugee camps.
Yeah, I mean, Naomi Klein puts it very well. She calls it disaster capitalism. And so this is another thing to organize against. But to be honest, there's so many aspects of this crisis that can get very overwhelming. And it is very overwhelming to encounter the incredible difficulties of it. So what I wanted to underline in the film was how we can also use this as an opportunity to come together. We can also use this as an opportunity to play to our strengths and our diversity of culture, and to fight for each other, because in what's happening right now, we just had Elon Musk, who is a Nazi, become a trillionaire, and this is
And stands on the
society that it
border.
cannot be sick. It's more sick. And by the way, SpaceX, being a private space program, is one of the most horrific things you can do for the climate, because you're depositing black carbon directly into the stratosphere, where it can raise the temperature even worse. Nobody wants this guy in charge. Nobody wants this Nazi to have this much power and money. That's the fight. It's
Yeah,
the
but
wall
he has
versus
an
the
escape
cable.
rocket to Mars. See, that's
I
the
hope he
trick.
takes it sometime soon.
Well, I'm laughing, but because I'm not crying. I want everyone to watch on HBO of Josh Fox's The Welcome Table. It'll knock you out. And then this is Greg Palast reporting for the Palast Investigates Substack.